Okay, we'll get underway. Welcome and thank you to everyone for joining today. I'm Abby, I'll be your host for today's webinar, Building the Golden Thread of Compliance. We're delighted you've taken the time to join us, whether you're responsible for facilities management, building safety or compliance. Today's session will explore how a more connected approach to managing compliance can help reduce risk, improve accountability and make life easier across your estate. I'm pleased to introduce our two expert speakers. First, we have Martin Hembling, Commercial Director at Swiftclean. He has more than 25 years experience in the compliance industry, and Martin has worked extensively across air hygiene, fire safety and water hygiene, helping organisations develop practical, effective compliance strategies. Joining Martin is Richard Cruz. He's our training manager here at Swiftclean Academy. Richard has many years of technical and training experience delivering specialist compliance training and helping organisations understand legislation standards, industry best practice in a practical and engaging way. During today's webinar, Martin and Richard will discuss what the golden thread of compliance means in practice, why it matters and how taking a joined up approach can help organisations improve safety, demonstrate compliance and better manage their buildings. They'll cover the most important building services including kitchen extract, fire damper function testing and remedials, ventilation compliance and Legionella control. If you have any questions during the session, please submit them using the chat thread function and we'll answer as many as possible at the end. With that, I'll hand over to Martin to get us started. Martin, over to you.
Thanks, Abby, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope you're all cool in wherever you're watching us from because it's another hot day. Can we move on to the first slide, Abby, please? So, kitchen extract fire safety cleaning. This is one of the most important parts of the services that a facilities manager or building owner needs to make sure they're adhering to. As part of the golden thread, which we'll hear a lot about today in today's seminar, is about adhering to the laws and the regulations. So for kitchen extract, what does the law say? You've got to follow the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, which requires the building operators to assess the fire risk and take steps to prevent or remove the risk. So how do you take steps to prevent and remove the risks? Well, you do inspection, testing and cleaning. Most fires won't start from a kitchen extract system per se, they might start somewhere else. But it's if the fire gets into the greasy ductwork, it could then accelerate the fire throughout the building and then make the fire more dramatic and then potentially have more risk to the building and its occupants. You also have to adhere to the Workplace Health and Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992 that says that, Regulation 5, for example, requires ventilation systems to be cleaned as appropriate. Well, what's appropriate? That's where BESA's TR19 grease comes into play. That's a specification that gives you the information that tells you what you've got to do in a system to maintain it and when to clean it. So that might be regular cleaning of once every 6 months, it might be 2 weekly, or it might be annually. You have to assess the risk, and you can do that by regular testing and seeing what the grease micron readings are. The worst case scenario is that if you don't do anything and there's a fire and someone unfortunately dies from that fire, the building owner and duty holder could be charged under corporate manslaughter. The insurance companies have a big part in this as well. If you're not having your cleans on a regular basis, so when the means average of your system is 200 microns or less, then you could be invalidating your insurance warranties. What's 200 microns or less? It's roughly half the thickness of a business card for those of you that still use business cards. So it's not very thick, it's not very much, but that's the average micron readings. Any one particular reading of 500 would need an immediate clean. But all that's good and well. How does that come into the golden thread of information? Well, you need to document and keep everything now for a lifetime, not 5 years, not 7 years, but for a lifetime. So if we start with a normal building, it's been designed, you must get the design details. You must make sure the installer is competent and qualified. Keep the building drawings as installed. Then when any services is done, so that's fan belts on certain types of fans, or your filters are changed, or regular cleaning, you must keep all that documentation and make sure it's easy to hand for anyone that comes in and requires to see it. Next slide, Abby, please. So we know what the problems can be. If you don't maintain your kitchen extract systems properly, then a fire could start within the building or within the kitchen extract and be accelerated. So we want to avoid that. By regular testing and cleaning, you can actually work out a ppm frequency, and then it's easier to maintain. How do you clean the systems? Next slide, Abby. So regular cleaning helps reduce it. You can see the examples of the pictures I've got up here. There's a ductwork, spiral ductwork with grease that looks like it's got a little lake running through it of grease. This is because the grease system inside there is still warm, and in today's hot weather, ducting that's on the roof or in a building, the grease doesn't stick so much to the ducting, it runs in a little river form. The temperature is keeping the grease in a liquid form. If there was a fire in there, that would spread even quicker than normal through there because it's in a liquid form. So you need to remove it on a regular basis. And it's quite an easy situation to clean. It's having the right access into the ductwork. Doors at a 2 metre interval is recommended under TR19 grease. And then you can either hand scrape it, brush it, chemicalise it, like the picture we've got on the right hand side. That's how the system should be looking after a clean. But you have lines of protection before it gets into ducting. You have filters. A lot of canopy systems will have the old type filters, like the picture I'm showing there, of a mesh filter. We would recommend you look at changing them to a baffle if you can, but you need to make sure that your system is adequate to take a baffle filter. You need to check the power of the fan to make sure. If you can't change them, you still need to clean your filter on a regular basis. The mesh filters are particularly hard to clean. They're normally submerged into a water or a dishwasher system and then scrubbed. But every time you clean those filters, you must keep a record of it. That's part of your golden thread of information. If there was a problem, a fire or something, and someone said, can we see the information of your cleaning and servicing? If you can't prove this, they'll think you haven't done it. So just make up a little schedule, take a picture of whatever it is and keep it in your golden thread of information. Next slide, Abby. So kitchen extract fire safety cleaning, what to look out for, just to quickly go through. You need your access doors, as I said, every 2 metre intervals. Make sure your cleaning contractor is competent and qualified to do it. An easy way to look at that is to go on the ventilation hygiene register and check to see if they're members. It's your duty as the building owner, the FM manager or the duty holder to make sure that all contractors that come onto your site are competent and can deal with the work that you've asked them to do with. Try and make sure that all the ducting is accessible. Insurance companies want to see a copy of your post-clean report and your certificates. There's some examples there of certificates. You've got the two in the forefront, the new type, and the two in the background or the old type. It doesn't matter. They're both valid until April next year, and then they'll go down to the front type of VHR certificates. Insurance companies want to see a full clean. If not, they're going to ask you why not, and then they're going to want you to take measures to make sure that the system can be cleaned fully. If you can't get a full clean, you can work with your competent subcontractor to get to a full clean. If you look at the pictures we've got on example there, this is a system that was cleaned partial, and that's not good enough. You need to have it like the bottom picture where it's cleaned fully, and that might be by adding extra access doors or spending a little bit more time on the actual kitchen extract cleaning. But whatever you do to that kitchen extract system, you've got to keep the documentation and keep it a place that everyone can find if they need it straight away. Insurance companies, if you're, look at your warranties, you'll probably find that a minimum requirement for an insurance company is to have your kitchen extract system cleaned twice a year as a minimum, and more frequently if consulted. Your subcontractor, whoever they may be, will be able to give you this advice. If they are better VHR scheme approved and trained into TR19, they can advise when you need your cleans by simply taking wet film thickness tests and working out from the date of the last clean to how much grease has been accumulated, and then they can tell you it's either a monthly clean, a quarterly clean, 6 monthly clean, etc. But at the end of the day, as important it is to keep your kitchen extracts clean and reduce the risk of fire, you've got to keep the documentation. And as I said earlier, that's for life now, not just for 5 or 7 years. I will now hand you over to my colleague Richard Cruz, who will take you through the wonderful world of fire damper function testing.
Thanks, Martin. So yes, we're going to be looking at fire damper testing, and I wanted to touch on Dame Judith Hackett's review and obviously linking that to the golden thread. So if we look at the report that came off the back of Dame Judith's review, we can first see some of the issues that she identified. So to begin with, there was ignorance in the industry. So regulations and guidance were not always read by those who needed to. And when they were read, they were often misunderstood and misinterpreted. There was a lot of indifference. So the motivation was to do things quickly, cheaply, and not up to the standards we expect. So rather than delivering quality homes and quality buildings where people are safe, this often didn't happen, as we saw in the Grenfell tragedy. So the concerns were often ignored. Building was, well, they were failing to prioritise safety, and they were using the vagueness of the regulations to kind of guide their way through. So there was a lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, and there was ambiguity over where the responsibility lies. So what do the people do? They stick their head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. So moving on to some of the solutions that were recommended. So we now want to think of buildings as a whole system. So we want to consider the different layers of a building and the protection that may be required to keep them safe. So it's a case-by-case basis. We know that not all buildings are the same. They're different sizes, there's different needs, and there's different occupants in each building. So now we need to approach it with a risk-based approach. So we base it on a clear risk matrix, and this will be more effective in delivering safe building outcomes. So systems and buildings that are multi-occupancy, they might be subject to a higher level of oversight. And this is proportionate to the number of people who are put at risk, rightly so. And then we look at the transparency of information. So this is more linked in with the golden thread, and it's creating that audit trail. So all the way through the life cycle of the building, from before a brick was laid all the way to occupants and maintenance. So some of you may be aware that the Building Safety Act was brought in 2022 when it was newly passed as an act. So it's an act of Parliament. It's something that's enforceable. It has 3 gateways. There's the planning stage, the design stage, and then after completion. If a contractor, if yourself finds an issue with a building, it can be passed back to the previous gateway. We've got a lot more recourse, powers of recourse now. If you do something wrong, you'll be made to fix it, essentially. Anyone who works on a building, as Martin said, must evidence that they're following the correct regulations and that they're competent to do so. And this can be evidence. So we often follow the SCEB process now. So it's looking at skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. Okay, moving on to the fire strategy. So this is part of the fire and emergency file, or the FEF, that principal designers and contractors must create and pass on to the building owner on completion. And for existing buildings, it's something you must have in place to ensure that you understand how to effectively manage fire risks in your building and what to do if there's an emergency, if there's a fire. So the regulatory reform fire safety order, this requires fire risk assessments to be carried out. Now this is obviously on all buildings. Some will come in, they'll examine the building structure, the fabric, all the services within the building, the space risk of the building, the occupants of the building, and they'll assess the likelihood of fire and then the impact on those who would be affected if a fire was to occur. Off the back of this, you'd be following recommendations from the risk assessment. And then finally, the BS 9999. This is the code of practice for fire safety in the design, management and use of the buildings, and it can be used as an alternative to approved document B. So if a building deviates from the standard regulations, so if it has longer escape routes, if it has enhanced smoke control or sprinkler systems, it can be used to balance the risk. So it introduced a risk-based framework that categorises the buildings based on the occupants' characteristics, whether they're asleep, whether they're alert, whether they're not mobile. It will take all this into account. We must remember that fire dampers are life-critical components. So they prevent the spread of fire and toxic smoke by maintaining it in that compartment. We saw with Grenfell, one of the big issues was smoke. So a lot of the fire dampers installed to the fire exits weren't smoke rated. There was no leakage rating on them. And this obviously hindered the emergency services during the evacuation. As we can see at the bottom here, we must test fire dampers, and it must be tested by someone competent at least once every 12 months. And this might increase depending on your building. And, if, for example, it might be a critical area in a hospital, it might even be a fire damper found in a kitchen extract system. So at least once every 12 months. What would you expect to see from a report? So if we look at this slide here, we can see some of the things we'd expect to see in a report as a minimum. Some of our old reports, you might just see, did it close and then did it reopen? That's not allowed. That's not effective. So we now need to see the damper location and ID number, any access issues and remedial recommendations. Were there cable trays covering access doors? Were there access doors there at all? The damper operation itself and any details of failure, and again, remedial action. Perhaps one of the springs didn't operate correctly. Can we replace the spring, or do we replace the whole damper? Any damage, so whether that be a fusible link damage, whether that be corrosion, maybe a sharp point of the damper is damaged, again, that might need a full replacement. Visual assessment of the fire stopping, so the fire stopping surrounding the damper also needs to be assessed, and in the surrounding area, if we find any issues, again, it must be reported and fixed immediately or as soon as possible. If we find any incorrect fixings, self-drilling screws or Tech screws on breakaway joints, these are higher melting temperature screws, so they're well over 3,000 degrees, their melting point. If there was a fire, this could potentially cause the damper to be ripped out the wall because the breakaway of the ducts couldn't occur. Alongside all of this, we need photographic evidence. So all the tasks above we would need evidence of, and then any cleaning and maintenance tasks would be covered. BESA DW145 has been updated fairly recently. We also want to see whether the damper has been installed correctly to begin with. So how do we see that information? We need the photo evidence. If we don't have photo evidence, we'd need to take off fire stopping and get more destructive. We don't expect to see that information for anything pre-2024, but for newer buildings, you really should have that. If you're having dampers installed and you don't have that information, go back to your contractor and insist on that information. If you have drawings, make sure they've been annotated, they've been updated, and they've been returned to you also. This all forms part of your golden thread. Okay, moving on, we've just got a slide here of common defects. We're not going to go through all of them, but we do need to look at a couple of common issues. So this one here you might see from the photo is a ghost damper or a floating damper. It's not actually in a compartment wall. It's not really doing anything. It's not going to prevent a fire spread from one room to the next. So it doesn't need to be there. Again, we can ask the client to go back to their fire strategy or maybe their risk assessor, and does it need to be there? If not, we can remove it. So whatever your defect, whether it's access, whether it's damage, whether it's a floating damper, we can decide, does it need to be there? Can it be removed? Can it be fixed? Is maintenance appropriate? The person who's advising to replace the damper effectively becomes the designer. So they take responsibility on checking the compartment wall rating, the space risk, etc. So again, there might need to be some dialogue with risk assessors, with building engineers to figure that out. Okay, moving on to ventilation cleaning, back with Martin.
Thanks, Richard. That was an insight to fire damper function testing. So there's a common theme here. It doesn't matter, we're talking about kitchen extracts, general ventilation, fire dampers. It's about keeping documentation from start to finish. So as you can see here, this is what we typically see when we go onto a building's roof or plant room. We will see a very nice air handling unit and some lovely ductwork that's been lagged properly to insulate it from hot and cold weather and to keep out any rain, etc. But what we really need to see is what's happening on inside. So these systems are generally very large compared to the kitchen extracts I was talking about earlier. You know, some buildings, especially in the cities around the UK, London, Birmingham, Manchester, we go on to some of the high-rise buildings, and these runs could be 800 or 900 meters long. And it's about making sure you maintain, clean, and give appropriate clean air throughout the building. Just move on to the next slide, Abby. So again, you've got the laws and the regulations that we have to adhere to. The Management Health and Safety Works regulation is probably the most appropriate, I think, here. It imposes a duty on every employer to make sure they give a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks. And under the Health and Safety at Works welfare regulations, that any enclosed space is ventilated by sufficient quantity of fresh or purified air. So how do we know if it's fresh or purified air? So what we will do is look at testing, maintenance, and on the maintenance side, it will be things like filter changing. On the air handling units, could be you've got the box filters, the sacrificial filters first, which are the first line of protection. Then you have a coil that will either heat or cool it down and come through. Every time that is changed, or the filters are changed, or they're checked, tested, or inspected, you need to document it, and that's part of your golden thread of information going through. Now, a lot of buildings that especially have got building FM managers or people working on site that look after the plant area will already have some, if not all, of that documentation. But what I've found over the last 27 years of going to site, one of the biggest things they haven't got is the as installed drawings. So if there's no drawings, how does someone coming on site know where that system runs? So through a bit more investigation, some people can find the drawings and others can't. If they can't, then they need to have a new set of drawings to be drawn up and given to them. So that can form part of the golden thread of information. Next slide, please, Abby. So once you've got the drawings, you can then work out where the ducting runs. Then you work out how we're going to check if it's visually clean. Does it need cleaning? And so what TR19 Air has come up with, and BS 1578, is a type of testing you can do. You can do a deposit thickness test, or you can do a European VAT test, an EVT. Either is acceptable under BESA and TR19 Air, and both are very quite simple to do by a competent person. And again, check the competency of the people doing it, make sure they've been trained and qualified to do what you've asked them to do in a way of testing. One of the things you have to do before testing starts is you have to tell the subcontractor what's your cleanliness class of your ducting. BESA have split these into 3 areas of low, medium and high. What is low risk, what's a high risk, what's a medium. They give you examples on TR19 Air, but on basically a low class is somewhere where people don't sit and work or use for many hours of the day. So it might be things like a car park extract where you just park your car and you walk through the shopping centre or the car park and get into the outside space or into your building. That's classified as a low risk. Medium risk is where 90% of all the other ducts come in. So the office I'm sitting in today is a medium class because I sit and use that office. Other people come in and sit to use that office on a regular basis, but we're not doing anything that needs a high level of cleanliness. So we're not sterile in here. We're not doing operations. We're not doing printing or anything like that. So those would be the medium, and the high class would be your things like your theatres in hospitals, your sterile areas in certain buildings and businesses. So that could be a printing press, or it could be a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. Now, some buildings will have all 3 classes and some will only have 1 or 2 of the classes. If you're unsure of how to class it, then your qualified, competent subcontractor will be able to help you with this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your choice. So you may decide to go on the high class or medium class, that is down to yourself. So what if you go into the medium class? Let's pick on that. What's the frequency of testing you need to adhere to and keep records of? So your air handling, so remember them pictures I showed you at the beginning, the nice plant areas, they need to be inspected and tested once a year. So that will be the air intake through all the fan chambers, to the coil chambers, to the filter chambers. The filters will be on a ppm anyway, but they must be looked at and changed at least 12 monthly, if not more. Now, depending on where they are, I've got a lot of buildings in London that are a medium class, but because the carbon in the air makes the filters dirty rather quickly, we change them on a quarterly basis. But TR19 Air says minimum is 12 months for inspections and change if need be. Any wet areas inside that plant, so if you've got a wet system that cools it down or heats it up, that needs to be checked on a 6 monthly basis. Any ductwork, so the trunking that goes from the air handling unit or the extract fan through the building, needs to be tested on a 24 monthly basis. And if you've got fire dampers, as my colleague Richard said, they've got to be tested at least 12 monthly. And then your terminals and grills, the bit where the air comes out or the air goes up back into the ducts, they need to be checked on a 24 monthly basis as well. So when these inspections and tests take place, you must keep the records for the golden thread of information. Where you keep them is up to you, but they've got to be somewhere that is accessible to people who come on board. So you might keep them on your computer or CRM system, but I've got a lot of clients who still keep a paper copy, because when people walk around, they want to have that so they can easily identify what was done and what's changed. So on a general ventilation system, you'll have lots of components that will be changed over the years, from the day it was designed and installed to the day that it's removed and replaced. And that will be things like your filters, as I said, your fan belts, it might be fan motors are being changed, the coil maybe needs to be changed because it's become defunct. It could be the grills are being changed because they've become rather scruffy over the last 10 years. And it could be things like ductwork changes because you've changed the design of where you want the air to go. So that will be then changed and put down, but they need to be kept and a record kept for everything. So ventilation systems, one of the biggest problems I've seen over the last few years is that the tumble dryer and laundry systems are neglected and forgotten about on site. A lot of businesses have tumble dryers and washing machine systems. These extract ducts that go from them become very clogged very quickly through the lint of the clothing that's going through the system. And this is now a major fire risk. So I've talked to my clients, and most of my clients will put their tumble dryer and laundry extracts on a 12 monthly testing cycle. They'll classify that as high class because the risk is higher than a general ventilation. And the other ones that is out of sight and out of mind is toilet extracts. Now, I hope no one's having their breakfast at 10:30 in the morning, but what you get up in the toilet extract is not very nice. You get the paper fibers from the tissues used, but you also get human skin from when the process goes through, unfortunately, and that will go up and collect in the ducting. Now, we all know, and we've seen ductwork in toilet extracts is normally the smallest ducting on the building. It's normally circular, 100 mil, 150 mil circular, and it gets blocked very quickly. But everything that gets normally put up there, the paper tissue and the skin, is very flammable, so it can spread the risk of fire. So again, we now talk to our clients about talking about putting that onto a 12 monthly testing regime to put it into the high classification because it is a higher risk. And I know I keep harping on about this, but I can't keep, you've got to keep doing it. You must keep all your records from install to servicing, testing, cleaning. It used to be 5 years, as we all know, as a minimum. Some people thought it's now 7 years. It's not. It's now lifetime. So it has to be proved. So if you've got a ventilation system that's been in for, let's take an easy time, 100 years, then, and it's a medium class, we would expect to see 50 reports on the testing and various cleans from it. You may have changed your filters 200 times. There needs to be 200 reports on it. You can't say, oh, I've done that over a year, I don't need to keep. You need to keep it. It gives you protection if anything goes wrong. And under the Building Safety Act, the first thing they'll ask for is the golden thread of information. Next slide, Abby, please. So the duty holder should ensure that the building information is digitally kept as a minimum, securely. There's no risk of losing that information. It should be made available to people who need the information to do a job, and it must be available when the person needs it. It must be presented in a way that's easy to be used. So whether or not that's on a computer, on a tablet, or even paper copies as well, it's got to be able to be used. And this includes your ventilation testing and cleaning and any remedial works. It might be that you've had the ductwork installed and you realise that the cleaning contractor needs another 30 access doors. Well, they should give you a report on the installation of those 30 access doors, but they should also update your drawings and mark on your drawings where those new doors have been installed, because in future years to come by, they will need to know where they are. I think that's my hint for moving on a little bit. So I shall hand over to Richard for the final session, which is Legionella compliance. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Martin. I saw a couple of questions come in there, so we'll try and get to those at the end. So Legionella and Legionnaires, what is it? So it's a naturally occurring bacteria which is found in fresh water. It might find its way in through the soil, but it enters our man-made systems. So it's very small. It's less than a micron in width, and it's maybe 20 microns in length. And for some scale, 1,000 microns is about a millimetre. So it's very small. It enters our man-made systems and becomes dangerous. It grows, it replicates, and then it contaminates the water. It creates a mist, an aerosol, which we can then breathe in through spray taps, through showers, etc. Why is it dangerous? So our man-made systems, they give the bacteria time through stagnant water or stagnant pipework. They give it a good temperature range. So water in a man-made system can easily sit at 35 degrees if not looked after appropriately. And then it gives you the food. So there's nutrients from scale, iron, rust, sediment, and sludge, and obviously oxygen as well. So if we breathe this in, it causes Legionnaire's disease, or it can cause Legionnaire's disease, which is a severe and potentially fatal form of pneumonia. Since COVID happened, it's been a lot easier to explain to people what it is, how it affects us, who it affects, and even how it's treated. So moving on to the law, Legionella is clearly hazardous to our health. So it falls under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and more acutely as part of the COSH regulations. So as part of the COSH regulations, it requires a suitable and sufficient assessment of risk to be produced. We call this the Legionella risk assessment, and it's an evaluation of the property's water systems. We identify and manage the conditions that allow the bacteria to grow. We highlight and score the risks, and we also give advice and solutions for the user to implement in their scheme of control. So the scheme of control will effectively tell the user how to eliminate or control the risks that they find. So moving on, how do we control the risks and how do we prove it? So we can follow legislation documents such as the ACOP L8, which is our approved code of practice. Also the HSG 274 Part 2 in particular gives us practical guidance to help us comply with the law. We would create a Legionella written scheme. So this is a legally required policy document, and this details for your specific building how you will control the risks in your system, and if there's an outbreak, what would you do? This must include schematics, and we're going to show you a little example of that shortly. Going back to the golden thread, we need to keep all the records indefinitely. So any risk assessments, any control schemes, any tests, inspections, samples, any work carried out on the system, and the state of the system itself. Is it operating? Has it been isolated? Some of the other checks we would do is chlorifier inspections, cold water tank inspections, shower descales, and of course temperature testing. So moving on, we've just got a little picture of a schematic diagram here. So this is one that I drew for the head office here at Swiftclean. We can see it's a relatively small system. However, you might be able to tell from the colour of the lines, there's various systems here. So if we follow the incoming mains in black, we've got a main system. If we go up to the cold water storage tank at the top and follow the down services in blue, we can see that there's another system there. The chlorifier on the first floor is a hot water system, and the combi boiler on the bottom left is another hot water system. So in this relatively small building, we've got 4 separate systems. So therefore, we've got 4 systems to consider. There's at least 8 sentinel points that would need measuring monthly, and then we've got various tanks and bits and pieces that would be inspected throughout the year as well. This diagram gives you an indication of what may or may not be working. If you have an outbreak, you might be able to identify what part of the system that outbreak is coming from through sampling. Okay, how do we ensure compliance? So we need to fulfill all the roles for Legionella control, and we need to make sure people are appropriately trained for those roles. So to begin with, the duty holder is the business owner, the landlord, person who owns the building. Under the duty holder, they must put a responsible person in place. So they're the ones who are going to manage the day-to-day control of Legionella bacteria. They're going to work with competent contractors, maybe their own site staff who are doing maybe water flushing tasks. So they must have training, they must have competence and authority to ensure the water systems are operated safely and that remedial actions are carried out in appropriate timescales. The site staff themselves, ideally trained, some Legionella awareness and competent for the tasks they've been given. So the responsible person, or perhaps someone who's come in to give training, they might be able to sign the person off. They can add it to their training matrix and it can be reviewed regularly. As we said, often site staff will do tasks such as flushing infrequently used outlets at least once a week, maybe doing even the monthly temperature monitoring. And on to the next slide, we also have to look at our contractors. So our contractors obviously have to provide a service as outlined in the service agreement. However, the duty holder is always liable. So they can't absolve responsibility by passing it off to other people. It does still come down to them. They need to make sure that you're using appropriately trained contractors. So at the bottom here, how do we ensure people are appropriately trained? You can check if the provider is registered with the LCA, for example, so the Legionella Control Association, and this is a widely accepted benchmark. So the LCA registration involves an in-depth yearly audit to confirm that the service provider is meeting and abiding by strict consumer and safety standards, and it is a very in-depth audit which we carry out yearly. And again, this all ties into the golden thread. If you know that your contractor is suitable and they can do what they say they're doing, that gives you a level of protection. You've checked, you've done your part of the audit. Okay, moving on, just a quick summary of risk reduction. So our recommendations are to appoint a competent contractor. So whether that's better trained and VHR approved for ventilation, perhaps an LCA member for Legionella services. Make sure your systems are 100% cleaned. That's what insurance companies are demanding now. 100% functioning system, a safe water system, and obviously fire dampers ensure that they're working appropriately. Adhere to your insurance company's minimum requirements. So your insurance company might be demanding that those cleans are done at least twice a year or as recommended by your contractors. Obviously keep records. The golden thread is the most important collection of information that's ongoing. Try and keep it digital, try and keep it in some order, at least by year or even better by month, so inspectors can come in and review it easily. Make sure the on-site team do their bit, clean filters weekly, flushing taps on a Legionella control system, and then regularly review meetings with your contractor. So have those face-to-face meetings or over Teams and make sure you're both happy with what each other are doing and improve as you go. Okay, we're on. Back over to you, Abbey.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Richard, for today. I hope everyone found it informative and has taken away something useful on how to build sort of a more connected approach to compliance within your own organisations. We're now going to move on to our Q&A session. So I know we've just got a couple of minutes left for this. We have got some questions in the chat. So the first one is, how do I know what quality class my vent duct is? Shall I go over to you, Martin, for that one?
Yeah. So depending on the type of building and the usage, If you've got people working in that building, or you're walking through that building on a regular basis, let's say using it for more than a couple of hours a day, then it wouldn't be a low class building. It would be a general rule for novices is, if it's an office, it's medium class. If it's a retail outlet like a shopping centre, a supermarket, or a food outlet place, it's medium class. Hospitals are medium class until you go into theatres and sterile areas, and pharmacies are high class. But general wards, offices, and the corridors you walk through a hospital would be medium class. High class, as I say, would be really sterile areas. Low class would be, sometimes you'll have a computer room that no one works in. They go in for half an hour a day to check it. That's low class. Kitchen, a car park extract, that would be low class. But if you're not sure, get your preferred subcontractor to discuss the TR19 air cleanliness class, and then between you can work out what cleanliness class you are. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Martin. And next question is, when did lifetime come into effect? Martin?
Building Safety Act, Richard, I believe in 2024.
Well, the Building Safety Act was introduced in 2022. So it's more that it's enforceable now. So previously it was obviously guidance and recommendation. I believe it might have been 2011, something came in around that, but it's enforceable now. So it's something that all buildings should be doing going forward.
Great, thank you. What locations should you test the ventilation system at?
So do you want me to answer that one, Richard?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So for a supply system or a general extract system, you need to, depend on the length of the ducting, but let's say the system is 250 metres or below in length, you would do one from the start of the ductwork coming out of the AHU, one from the middle, and one from the end, and one from the AHU. So that's 4 tests per system. If the system is larger than 250 metres, you would do another test every 100 metres for purposes of working out your means average. But it's not very many tests. You'll get those from, let's say, 4 tests for a small system and 5 or 6 tests from a larger system.
Thanks, Martin. I think we've got time for just one more. So I think this one's over to Richard. So do residential properties need regular Legionella testing, and is that the homeowner's responsibility?
So for residential properties, if it falls under something that's the landlord's responsibility, they typically be taking control of the water before it enters the homeowner. So if there's any water tanks or boilers that are in a separate plant room, they typically be controlled under their responsibility. Once it goes through into your home, it becomes your responsibility to ensure you keep the water moving effectively.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so as we come to the end of today's webinar, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Martin and Richard for sharing their expertise, and to all of you for taking the time to join us today. If you think of a question after the webinar or would like to discuss any topics that we've covered in more detail, please get in touch with the Swiftclean team. We're here to help with everything from compliance, surveys, testing, remedial works, to specialist training and ongoing compliance management across air, water and fire. So yeah, please get in touch. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.